For the first time in a long time, I felt something that I so desperately yearned for: hope. I've never been one to disobey my parents, especially not when I remembered what my punishment for disobedience was in the first place. I followed their exact orders. I had it memorized, to a T. Keep your head low, nod if spoken to, maintain a smile at all times, and only speak if expected. If you followed those 4 rules, you were sure of one thing: being fed. But alas, my parents were unable to keep their promises and continuously made up more rules to follow, just to frame me as the worst daughter in the world. Maybe I was too sarcastic at times, but it was always out of pure fear. I never thought of myself as a disappointment. Other than that, I was to remain silent at home, practically invisible, not a bother. Sometimes I thought this was just a rite of passage, that my parents were just helping me avoid problems by making me be completely invisible to the world, that it was all just a big act of love. Other times, however, I had to face the fact that this was just a way to punish me for simply existing. I remember the times my mother would smack my hand with a 50-inch ruler whenever I would raise my voice too loud during dinner time, especially when I asked them to pass the salt. I was not supposed to bother anyone, not even to be polite. It was confusing at times, but I kept to myself during most of my teen years. I loved them. I couldn't say I didn't, but I didn't like them. Not after they deprived me of platonic relationships, romantic ones, and parental love. They couldn't handle the fact I was born out of wedlock. As if it were my fault they couldn't hold back the urges they so claimed to be sinful. They moved away, according to them, due to fear of being shunned by the community. Strict parents make curious kids. I learnt that the hard way. I was homeschooled most of my life after I began acting out while I was enrolled in primary. Not that I learned much anyway. This forced me to investigate on my own, even after being denied a computer or general access to the outside world. I managed to swipe a library card and pick out a few books, which, to be fair, never really bothered them. As long as they had their daughter's head buried in a book, they were sure to not hear a peep. I guess they liked this idea. It was a win-win for both of us. This also meant I was one to search for new books in my parents' attic, which in turn made me discover old photographs of unknown people. One of them drew my attention, of an older woman with curly black hair holding on to my mother when she was a child. I assumed it was family. That being said, my parents fed me continuous lies about my family back in the countryside, and how much they hated their guts for daring to go against their creator. I always thought of them as hypocrites, unable to cope with their own mistakes, so they had to blame others, or else they would be dragged down into a hole called realization. That was too scary for them.
Alanza, you are not leaving, and that's final.
My dad finally said, slamming down his fork onto the table in a way that it stuck to it. I kept my head down. I had received that day an acceptance letter to Cambridge University, one of the country's most prestigious school. It would be an honour to be called a student. I knew they wouldn't love the news, but a part of me told me that trying was good enough.
Cambridge, huh? Who would have thought that they took the time to read your application, much less say yes to it? There are so many more qualified students that I'm sure.
You selfish, horrible, and piece of...
My father didn't finish that sentence. He seemed to hold back, something he didn't usually do. He always had something to say whenever I acted out of line.
Don't you realise someone else could benefit from this position? You're being completely selfish. You only think about yourself.
I dared to glance up. Father, I just want you to be proud of me. Coming back with a bachelor's from Cambridge would be something you could gloat about in the future, I managed to say.
Why would we be proud of you? You have done nothing more than give us trouble, drain us of money, and on top of that you dare tell us to brag about our daughter.
He spat. It should have ended there. I usually never insisted, nor did I fight back with their final decision. However, we were not talking about what to have for dinner. We were talking about moving to Cambridge. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the need to make myself be heard. Let me repay you. If I go to Cambridge, get my degree, I promise you I'll pay back every cent you had to pay these past years. You won't have to worry about your worthless daughter being at home, annoying you every time you have to look at her. Just let me not be that inconvenient thing, I begged. My mother's eyes widened when she heard me disregard his final choice, almost as if she knew what was going to happen. My father's face went red, more red than usual. I've only seen this shade of red whenever the football match doesn't go his way, and he punches holes through the wall. Now that I tried to defend myself for the first time in my short life, he had to make himself heard as well.
Why, I ought to...
Smack. It had been a while that I hadn't been smacked like that. It took all the words out of my mouth. It took away the bravery I had to talk back. I guess my father got what he wanted, a quiet daughter.
Listen here. You are, and I repeat in case your parasitic mind doesn't understand, not going to Cambridge. You are to stay here. You heard me?
Yes, father. That night, I snuck out of my window. I lived in a second-story bedroom, so the fall wouldn't make me take too much damage. I wasn't stupid. Maybe I was blind, but not stupid. I knew there had to be a better life for me. There had to be a place where I could finally belong and be appreciated. Disobeying my parents was not something I used to do a lot, at least not intentionally. But I felt this urge to flee, to never look back, to live the life I knew I could have, which was why I ended up at King's Cross Station. I tried desperately to stop anyone in hopes of finding a train that would lead me straight to Cambridge. Nobody even dared to look at the strange girl who could barely speak due to fear and years of neglect. I felt completely helpless, as if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I sat down on a bench to contemplate whether or not returning and dealing with my parents' punishment was the right thing to do. And then I saw it. I thought it was just a shadow from the corner of my eye, but I swore I saw it. A figure merged itself with the wall. I had to do a double take at first and couldn't see anything. Then it happened again. A family of 4 threw themselves against the wall without hesitation, completely disappearing through it. I tried to make sense of it, but there was no explanation to what was occurring right in front of me. Nobody else around me seemed to have noticed what was happening, so I thought that years of isolation finally took its toll. I pressed my hands against the brick wall, feeling how my hand was engulfed by a cold, air-like sensation. I immediately pulled my hand back out, making sure it was still there. It was then that bravery took over my body, and I threw myself in there. Platform 9 3/4. For the first time in a long time, I felt something that I so desperately yearned for. Hope.